Far Cry is a weird series for me. It's one that I've definitely reveled in before I played or even bought Far Cry 3. I've always wanted to try out these games, which were almost always talked about in a positive light. So I bought Far Cry 5 in 2018, played it for about 20 hours, turned it off one day and didn't play it all the way until mid-December of 2021. Why? I don't know, I love Far Cry 5, and in between those 3 years, I also played Far Cry 4, a game I've got many mixed feelings about. But today, I'm talking about the third Far Cry game I played, and indefinitely the third in the series, Far Cry 3. Often referred to as the greatest Far Cry game still to this day, let's analyze the aspects that made this installment the shining beacon of the franchise in its entirety. Far Cry 3 is set on the Rook Islands. It's a collection of a few different islands, all available for exploration and free roaming. The world is mesmerizing. The vistas upon mountains, the splashes of the ocean in various rivers, the ambiguous forest locations, the abundance of wildlife populating the amalgamation of the islands is surely a sight to behold. Its environmental design is something that not many games can match. The graphics are also superb. There's no aspect other than the inner details of textures that really stands out as outdated in any regard. It's an amazing experience all around in its presentation and graphical connotations. For 2012, this game surely was one of the best looking of its era. This game reprises and induces a factor that many Ubisoft open worlds lack today, either due to contemptuous realizations of their tried methods or simply pure laziness. The world of Far Cry 3 truly, in all aspects, feels alive. It's bursting with life on the inside of its islands and on the outside of it as well. It has a remarkable sense of liveliness that reinvigorates the eccentric atmosphere of being stuck on an outwardly beautiful island, populated by a large variety of wildlife hiding deeper secrets within. There's a lot of aspects that adds to this atmosphere, and this creates the nuanced perception of immersion in the world of Far Cry 3. Details are scattered all throughout the island, an exceptional amount actually. Skinning animals and having unique animations for that is something that games in 2012 could only dream of. Having this tribe live on the island oppressed by outsiders gives the environments within the actual islands a level of authenticity in retrospect to tribal traditions. The architecture of the buildings is simplistic in its design, houses made of straws and wood, easily flammable, and this fits exactly in line with the tribe and how they live their lives. Simplicity seems to be a major aspect of their daily lives, and their environment and homes truly reinforce this notion. As for when you go to Hoyt or Vasa's various estates and buildings, they're instead created with solid concrete, not exactly prone to explosions and fire. This little detail is one that I thought was pretty interesting and gave a greater understanding of the contrast of power and adversity that sat between these two factions. The open world also doesn't feel redundant in a story connotation either. It serves the story extremely well, and the gameplay surely benefits from being open-ended instead of a closed linear area to explore. I think Far Cry 3 is one of the first of its kind to make open worlds an essential feature to creating a larger story and the space for more immersive elements. Sure, nowadays the tried and true formula of Ubisoft is certainly a joke, but they had it here, and it didn't feel forced or unexceptional in the respective nature of its various other elements. Everything just looks good in a connotation even till this day. Explosions are awesome, fires surely rage about and create a large scale of chaos within gunfights. Water splashing and bubbling gives it another layer of depth. The wildlife, some aggressive, some passive, have their own unique animations. The cars, planes and boats all serve purposes within traversing the world in its own denseful nature, and the world as a whole revolves around the complexity of truly complementing every other individual aspect of the game. That it's astonishing to see through these greater technical realizations, to see the passion of the developers quivering behind. It's a momentous open world. At the time of its release, its aliveness and beautiful vistas couldn't be nothing short of granular, and although it might have sparked a sadder trend in gaming that could be exceptional in some cases and others downright disappointing, it might have made Ubisoft content with the formula that's repeated throughout the rest of their other franchises and most of their games even till this day, but it surely had impact in its graphical fidelity and environments that gave out a true sense of immersion, a testament of its influence and a spark of what was to surely come in the next decade of games, utilizing the greatest potential and aspects of open worlds to create the most immersive and impressive of experiences. I honestly think Far Cry 3 still somehow retains the greatest gameplay of the series even till this day. This in retrospect can seem a little hilarious that Ubisoft couldn't quarterly build upon the building blocks placed by Far Cry 3 in a meaningful way, but that's entirely besides the point. Far Cry 3 in its gameplay, combat, and wider exploration of its open world aesthetic has a distinct level of variety, complexity, and most importantly, a plethora of fun to be had. The gameplay can be broken down into two major segments that courteously complement and build upon each other. These aspects are combat and exploration. Firstly, let's talk about combat. It's goddamn fun. Oh, it's a lot of fun. I think it is easily the most fun to be had in a Far Cry game. There's a wide level of variety offered in the combat scenarios, which makes it ever more interesting to engage in. Stealth and going guns blazings are both options in most scenarios that aren't strictly one or the other. The guns are all varied and serve completely different roles in different unequivocal scenarios of combat itself, and all feel useful in order to take down various archetypes of enemies. The variety includes various assault rifles, shotguns, handguns, flamethrowers, RPGs, snipers, bows, all of which feel so satisfying to shoot and land an arrow or bullet into an enemy with. I think that's one of the strongest suits of this game in opposition to many other first-person shooters. The gunplay is varied in its approach and it feels extremely satisfying to the point where it benefits many other differential aspects of the gameplay in its entirety to overall elevate the experience. Then there's the explosions and different equipment that you can use as well to help you on your journey. This can include various explosives such as trip mines, grenades, molotovs, C4s, and a few others which, like the weapons in the game, seem to serve different purposes altogether and individually, which gives them all a sense of usefulness that overall creates a tighter and more intuitive combat experience. Grenades are your everyday video game grenade. Cook it in your hand, time it, and throw it at vehicles and groups of enemies to efficiently take them down. C4s pretty much serve this same purpose, except with the element of timing, something all C4s have. Molotovs can be used to burn crops in various missions of the game, or to burn down enemy vehicles and create chaos in the midst of warfare. Trip mines are extremely useful in stealth scenarios, not particularly incidents where you're not allowed to make a single noise or kill, but in scenarios where you might be low on health and hiding from a large quantity of enemies. Taking down larger enemies and ones in groups can be done exponentially well with the use of various trip mines. Explosions also aren't served to you in all directions, which makes their use even more noteworthy in the trickiest of scenarios due to the nuanced scarcity. Now onto enemy archetypes. There's various ones in these games which all make enemy encounters a lot more interesting than shoot bang shoot like most other first person shooters out there today. There's the normal enemies which can be taken down quite easily with the use of any simple weapon. Then there's the enemies with explosives and Molotov cocktails, which are a lot more tricky to take down as they usually hide behind obstacles and cover while throwing Molotovs at you in a pretty accurate way, and it adds another layer of depth in the intensity of combat as you run and shoot all the foes in your way while dodging the explosions and not trying to get caught on fire. Then there's the enemies that strictly use melee, which are usually but not limited to the same ones that utilize the explosives in the game. They again help elevate the intensity of the combat as you're dodging and shooting them while they're running at you while you get shot from all other directions at the same time. There's also enemies that use RPGs strictly, but these enemies are usually restricted to the vehicle sections in the game and don't pop up that often, but are still an interesting addition to the gameplay and combat loop. Lastly, there's the heavy enemies, which usually can have two different weapons, which are a lot more dangerous than any other weapon that you and other foes carry throughout the game. That's usually what they are constrained to, but these guys are damn powerful. They've got armor all around their body, including their head, so gunning them down right next to them is one of the least efficient ways to take them out. In order to take them down, you've got to use distance and cover to your advantage to surely create a level playing field with the enemy. They almost feel like mini bosses when playing on higher difficulties, and the best way to take them out is either using explosives that are again quite scarce, so that's not always a viable option. And the other option, which is much more applicable in most scenarios, is gunning down their head to make their helmet pop off, which gives you an opening to take them down swiftly. Lastly, in the combat section, we'll touch upon the stealth mechanics of this game, which are definitely utilized a significant amount throughout the game's runtime. The stealth isn't anything complex and not something that is too different to what is seen in any other Far Cry game, but what helps elevate the experience of stealth is the skill upgrades which allow for you to take down multiple enemies within a certain vicinity at the same time, which can make stealth a much more applicable option in combat in a lot more scenarios than when you just start the game. For stealth, you can distract enemies and take them down, hide their bodies and move on slowly while ensuring you hide behind cover and in foliage to ensure that you are not caught. It's a pretty fun system, but it's definitely not anything that has any major level of depth in complexity, but it's pretty fun to do, and that's all I really wanted from it at all. Finally, I want to talk talk about the game's skills. The game's skill tree is broken down into 3 major sects. They're all aptly named after the island's wildlife, and in itself adds to the overall immersion of the game in even the smallest of ways. The Heron, upgrades that particularly pertain to that of long-range takedowns and as well as overall mobility. The Shark, assault takedowns and healing abilities are greatly increased through the use of this skill tree. The Spider, upgrades that utilize and incentivize stealth takedowns and general survival needs that can make you a better hunter of both humans and wildlife on the island. These skill trees are quite diverse from one another and truly do add a level of depth to the game's combat and gameplay as well, because of the variety in the different upgrades that are available. Each tree pertains to a certain agenda of the game's combat and gameplay that make it harder to choose between what to upgrade now and what to upgrade later to surely increase your persistence and power on the island. It's interesting and better than what's definitely featured in both Far Cry 4 and 5, and a good complex measure that can make the gameplay a lot more intriguing altogether. I previously mentioned the pure, beautiful, ecstatic landscapes of the islands that are the player's collective oyster of play for the entire game. The game's free roaming isn't anything more than the sum of many other open worlds, neither is it anything less. But in hindsight, the game's free roaming system is basic, yet it doesn't do anything to take away from the experience even after playing the best of open worlds. There's plenty of things to do in the world of Far Cry 3, some repetitive and some the first letters of Ubisoft's undying need to create a formulated response to creating open worlds instead of a case-by-case basis. There's no definitive problems with the world. It feels alive with the wildlife, foes and friends surely contributing to the ensurety of the world's liveliness in all aspects. It feels alive in many ways. When roaming around roads, there'll be wildlife roaming about, pirates patrolling, and in the various outposts you can claim in the game's expansive map. There'll also be friendly tribespeople patrolling the way across roads and coming into firefights with others. I think one of the greatest wrongdoings of most open worlds is making the player feel as if the world breathes and lives normally without the interaction of the player exactly creating and or sparking such things. It should feel alive in a way that taking out the player won't dramatically affect the lives of these people. This doesn't mean that the player character shouldn't be a savior or a hero, but make it feel as if the world functions without the player there. Luckily, through random events like pirates getting attacked by tigers and other wild animals, and the aforementioned firefights between the different factions within the game, the liveliness of the world is truly and reflectively elevated in a great way. To help the free roaming and the experience of the player as a whole, traversal should be accessible, fast, and fun in most ways. Vehicles serve this aspect in the Far Cry series. While Jason can travel using many different methods of vehicular transportation, such as dune buggies, trucks, cars, jet skis, boats, and even gliding with a wingsuit and using a parachute to get around from one island to another. The vehicles themselves do feel pretty good to control. I personally didn't feel any dissonance with the game's controlling of vehicles, and all felt well when controlling every variety of vehicle in this game, and nothing in that regard screamed out the necessities of outdated game design. As for exactly what you're using these vehicles for and where you're going outside of the game's main missions, there's of course numerous outposts and activities to keep you busy. Outposts are self-explanatory in game design, especially in the way of open world philosophy, maybe for worse nowadays, but that's beside the point for this game. Outposts are scattered throughout the distinct islands that you can travel between, and most of them serve entirely as fast travel points that will give you a great way to travel between large expanses of area without tiring yourself out by driving 15 to 20 minutes to your next objective because it's on another island. Other than their self-imposed purpose, they're also just fun to claim. They vary in scale, with some much smaller than others, but taking them down is just another testament in helping the player truly understand how great the Far Cry formula and its combat just are in general. I enjoyed all the outposts I took over, and although it can become repetitive, it's not entirely a big deal in most regards. As for other activities, the outposts give the player opportunities to indulge in different side quests, which rebels will ask the player to indulge in various tasks to help their fight against the island's various opponents. The side missions themselves are quite bare-bone basic, and usually boil down to missions such as supply runs or timed quests to give someone something. It's nothing complex and definitely doesn't add upon the game's main narrative in any way of the word, like most other side quests should try to do, and I don't think I really did more than a few of them because they were just kind of boring and not a very great aspect of the game in its entirety. There's a few other things that you can do in the open world of Far Cry 3, but I don't think those things are even worth to note, as they don't really add anything to the game and are just for players who want to fully complete the game or to really immerse themselves further by doing these activities. The game's side missions and other activities other than the outposts are quite bland and extremely uninteresting, but the world is still incredible regardless of it. But whether an open world was needed to deliver the story of the game is only certified by the main mission structures themselves and not the activities that are encapsulated within. In my last video, I went over a plot synopsis of the story and then my personal thoughts on the characters, the events, and such. This time, I want to talk about the overarching narrative presented through most aspects of the game, the characters, and the themes that truly make this the amazing story it is. And of course, spoilers will be discussed here. I had extremely high hopes for the narrative, villain, and characters of Far Cry 3 after hearing about it having the best story of the series and the story being iconic in gaming for many years. So I definitely had high expectations when coming into the story, and I can say without a doubt that I was not disappointed at all by what was presented to me. The characters in their own right are all interesting, complex in some regards, and the supporting cast as well as the overarching themes presented in the game deliver a fantastic story encapsulated by one core notion: insanity. I know you might be thinking that I just exaggerated what Vars said quite early into the game, and that I'm just using that as the point of interest to build this section of the video, but that's not all it is. Far Cry 3 is all about choosing oneself, morality, insanity, and most importantly, the consequences of all of them. It makes the player question their own morality, whether Jason is even good. Is he the savior? It's a theme that's represented through his eventual disinterest in his friends and his allegiance to Citra. And I think Vars, Citra, and Jason build the very core of what makes the narrative of this game so damn intriguing. Because very much to the moment in which you kill Vars, his monologues and killings seems like the reprimandations of an insane man that deserves to be put down. But there's got to be a level of perspective needed to ensure that you're looking at the game's narrative in a more open-ended sense. I think what Vars is trying to allude to is the fact that Jason and him are very much alike. The first time I killed was for my sister is one of the first lines said by Vars to Jason, and I think this is ironic to Jason's perspective of him being some sort of savior of the Rakyat, opposed to the one that shall cause their eventual downfall. Jason killed for the first time for his deceased brother. They have so many mirroring personalities, but Vars was swayed by drugs and money, while Jason is out for revenge. They both were good people before they ventured onto the island. That's another aspect that makes the story as good as it is. I still can't definitely put my finger on the villain in the game because there is no clear one, but I think in most regards Citra or Jason take the spot. Citra is a manipulative and cunning leader, and what she makes Jason do is a testament to her power and Jason's desire for evil. He's not a good person once he leaves, and if you choose to save his friends, he himself acknowledges this. Jason, more so than the others, is often presented as the insane one. As he develops throughout the story, it becomes more of just fun for him. He enjoys killing. He loves it actually, and his morality suffers as he becomes more centered on himself than the protection of others, which is what he initially meant to do once stuck on the island. The character dynamics between Jason and others is also such a good point to bring up, such as Vars and Jason, Citra and Vars, Jason and Citra, Hoyt and Jason. And it truly brings out the greatest aspects of the story by delving deeper into these relationships created by Jason's revenge quest, but it turns from revenge into just fun, and it's scary what Jason turns into. And by the end of the game, I wasn't exactly rooting for him to succeed, and I was kind of hoping he'd die. There had to be some consequence of his evil, and there was. He was completely different. He was a monster, and he'd completely changed due to his uncanny actions on the island. They'd left in absolute ruin, even after picking the so-called right moral action. The damage had been done, and he'd surely never recover from such a time in his life. He's a monster, a killer, and if you look at certain scenarios from the perspectives of the people that he kills, he's a goddamn lunatic, and I can understand why the other factions are so eagerly trying to kill him. And that's what I think Far Cry 3's narrative imposes: insanity, reflection of morality, choices, consequences. That is Far Cry 3. Far Cry 3 is a brilliant game. In some aspects of it, it is flawed, but in the aspects that are its strongest merits, it puts a certain emphasis on particularities within game design that it certainly excels in, and it itself was able to spark a formula that to many might have been the downfall of the open world experience, but it also creates opportunities for many other developers to build upon such a foundation in a way that truly is innovative and builds upon this genre in gaming. The gameplay, graphics, story, and characters hold up remarkably well, and there's no underlying outdated features within the game that don't allow it to stand among the greats. It's indefinitely my favorite in the long-running series, and I'm excited to cover the other games on this channel as well as for myself playing through the other ones that came out before to see how far the series has truly come since its debut by developer Crytek. Hi everyone, hope you all vastly enjoyed this video. I had a fun time making this retrospective too, and I'm kind of in a groove to make some more. In my last video I said my next video would be out in a week and be on Bulletstorm. However, plans have changed for for now, and instead, in a few days time, there will be a retrospective on the first Uncharted game, Drake's Fortune. This one has been a fun video to make, and I'm excited to share it with all of you very soon. Other than that, I'm working on that Bulletstorm video, a Far Cry 5 video, and also a retrospective on Slay the Spire. Anyway everyone, I think that's it from me for today. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.